Hello everyone! Today we'll look at a game between the 10th World Champion Boris Spassky and the 13th World Champion Garry Kasparov. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and write a comment. In this encounter, Garry played with the white pieces and started the battle with the queen's pawn. Black replied by developing the knight, and we get an Indian defense on the board. Kasparov quickly takes control of the center with his pawns, while Black builds up piece pressure there, and Garry chooses the Zemish system. On one hand, White's center becomes solidly reinforced, but on the other hand, White's pieces on the king side start running out of space. Spassky responds by bringing his knight into play. White develops his bishop to e3, aiming to castle long and begin a kingside attack, the area where the enemy monarch will most likely end up. In reply, Spassky plays a6, preparing to greet the king on the queen's side with care and warmth. So after knight to e2, Black finishes the last stage of preparation. White plays queen to d2, and Black castles. Kasparov pushes his pawn forward. Here, Black could have placed a blocker on a5 and continued playing on the opposite side of the board. But Boris Vasilyevich immediately strikes back with b5, attacking the pawn on c4. A hand-to-hand battle begins. Who will get there first? Kasparov plays h5, sacrificing a pawn, but it's dangerous to capture on h5 since White can respond with h6, trade the dark-squared bishops, and simply checkmate the enemy monarch. So Spassky captures on c4, opening up the b-file in case of a long castle. Or if the king stays in the center, that center can also be undermined. White continues the pawn storm on the king side. In this position, it was worth playing knight to b4, aiming at the d3 square, and threatening to plant the knight deep in Kasparov's camp. And after the possible reply knight to g3, defending d3, Black could go for the mentioned central breakthrough with c5. We get an extremely sharp position with mutual chances for both sides. But instead of jumping with the knight to b4, Boris Vasilyevich decides to sacrifice a piece for a couple of pawns. After capturing on g4, he strikes back with the knight. White still castles long. Black trades on e3. Formally, Black has 3 pawns for a piece, but in this particular position, those pawns can't really show their strength, unlike White's pieces, which are perfectly placed to attack on the king side. Spassky plays e6. Kasparov captures on g6, opening up the h-file, and then transfers his rook to the second rank to increase the pressure. Black opens up an escape route for his king, just in case. Kasparov clears the second rank. After d5, he plays knight to f3 to bring another knight into the attack. Spassky makes another move, and here White should have played rook to h2 without fearing the loss of the pawn on d4. Because if Black captures on e4 and then on d4, he could even sacrifice his rook with rook to h8. Black is forced to capture the rook, but now comes another tactical blow, followed by a check that drives the king back. The move knight to g5, and there's no clear defense against checkmate. For example, after queen to d7, White simply delivers mate with knight to f6. If Black defends with queen to e7, then White also has a forced mate in 2 moves. But from this moment on, the future 13th world champion seems to lose the thread of the game. Instead of playing rook to h2, he locks the position with e5, giving the enemy knight a beautiful outpost on f5 and also allowing a central break with c5. Boris Vasilyevich immediately takes advantage of this mistake. White should have still gone for rook to h2, ignoring the threat of knight to f5, since the queen could retreat to f2 and White would have a powerful attack on the king side. Instead, Kasparov defends against the knight's jump to f5. Black strikes at the center, sacrificing a pawn. White greedily captures it, and after queen to c7, the position becomes unbalanced. The pawns on e5 and c5 are weak. Black has two connected passed pawns in the center and definite counterplay chances. Here, Garry plays queen to f4, targeting the f7 square and preparing a possible knight jump to g5. Black threatens to capture on e5. White defends the pawn with a rook, but faces another thrust, d4, yet another pawn sacrifice. However, if White captures on d4 with the knight, then Black can take on e5, threatening to invade on d3 and seize the initiative. Apparently realizing the dangers that could befall his poor king, Kasparov decides to sacrifice the exchange on d4. After a series of trades on that square, Spassky captures on c5. Now White has two pieces for a rook and two pawns, but the pawn on e5 is weak and constantly needs protection, and the light-squared bishop is completely inactive. Still, Garry doesn't lose hope of checkmating the Black king. Spassky brings his rook over to the open file, while White creates threats against the f7 point. Boris Vasilyevich defends with his queen. After White's reply, queen to h4, he creates a tactical threat, a combination. If White captures on d3, the diagonal pin prevents them from taking with the knight. And if they capture on h3 with the queen, Black simply takes on g5. White's attack has nearly burned out. All their pieces are hanging, and Kasparov throws the last log into the dying fire of his attack. After capturing on e6, comes a check, forcing the king to step back. Another check follows, but here the king can't retreat. It would lose the rook on b8, so Spassky blocks with the bishop. And in this position, if Garry Kasparov had found the strong move knight to d5, he could have had a draw. Because after this clever trick, White attacks the queen, and if rook takes on d5, then White captures on f8 with check, and after the recapture, takes the pawn back, then wins the rook and plays bishop to g2, getting excellent compensation for the lost exchange. But to his misfortune, the future 13th world champion misses the strongest continuation, knight to d5, and instead simply captures the pawn on g6. After the reply king to d8, Kasparov immediately resigns, because Black already has a material advantage. The bishop on h3 is hanging, and there's simply no way to defend the position. And that's how Boris Spassky managed to outplay the future 13th world champion Garry Kasparov. A brilliant and instructive battle full of tactics, missed chances, and sharp ideas. If you enjoyed this game, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.